Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Blackonomically Speaking here in Lukman Nation in Black Power Media. If you are watching on Black Power Media, you are watching on the most dangerous platform on social media, and you are watching the most dangerous show, Lukman Nation, on Black Power Media. And is this thing frozen? What is going on with this video? I don't know what's happening here at home, but it's interesting. Always an interesting thing when you do things yourself. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining me for another show this week. I was hoping I wouldn't have any internet problems since I'm at home this time and not in a cheap hotel, but you know how things go. And as always, really glad you all have joined me. Really excited for another episode of Blackonomically Speaking with none other than our resident economist, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. Dr. Tauheed, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here. Always.
Absolutely. And folks, I forgot to do the housekeeping stuff. Look, if you are watching on Black Power Media, please subscribe to Black Power Media. Click the notification bell to make sure you get notified whenever anything is uploaded to the platform, whenever a new show is going live. You don't want to miss anything we have on Black Power Media for you. We have a lot. And you can support Black Power Media on Patreon, patreon.com/Black Power Media. Lots of extra content for patrons there. And you can also support Lukman Nation on Black Power Media on Patreon, patreon.com/Lukman Nation. Dr. Tauheed, there's so much going on economically, so much not good things going on economically. And it's put, as always, poor people, which a significant percentage of Black people and Hispanic people are poor, are really, really feeling the brunt of it. One of those things immediately, and could feel another of those things down the line if the GOP has their way. So the first thing I want to get to is something that was just reported on this week, and it was reported on by Politico and in a lot of other places also. Excuse me. But Politico reports that Biden built the strongest safety net in U.S. history. Now that's arguable, but they say now it's collapsing around him. That part absolutely true. But collapsing, I don't know if that's the right word, because they point out in this piece that new data released Tuesday by the Census Bureau found that the poverty rate spiked to 12.4% in 2022, up from 7.8% in 2021, as an array of enhanced federal benefits meant to help families afford food, housing, and other basic needs expired one after another. The poverty rate for children alone hit 12.4%, more than doubling from 5.2% in 2021. The poverty rate for children is calculated separately from the overall poverty rate in this country. People need to be clear about that. They say the numbers represent a sharp reversal from a year earlier, and an erasure of the gains made during the pandemic when the passage of Biden's American Rescue Plan drove the share of people in poverty to the lowest level on record. So, as anemic as the American Rescue Plan was, it did do some good things. It did provide needed help to poor people in this country in lifting poor people, particularly children, out of poverty. And that lifting people out of poverty outpaced a broader economic recovery that was still in shaky initial stages. So poor people actually did better than the overall economy during the first year of Biden's American Rescue Plan, which was last year.
Mm-hmm.
But now that those programs have been allowed to expire, and that's why I have a problem with them saying that the programs collapsed. They didn't collapse. They didn't just fall apart on their own. That's not what happened. White House aspirations permanently enlarging the social safety net were instead overtaken by fears of rising inflation and political blowback. It has since mostly, meaning the Biden administration, has since mostly abandoned those goals. They just stopped fighting for them. Embracing a scaled down Bidenomics agenda that is focused on easing costs and slashing government debt. That sounds a lot like Reaganomics to me, with the exception of the trickle down part. And there are some interesting data charts from JPMorgan Chase, of all people. But before we get into that, Dr. Tauheed, I want your thoughts about the Biden administration not fighting for making these plans permanent. The way that the GOP, remember how they fought and made the Bush tax cuts permanent?
Right.
And we're still living with the Bush tax cuts today.
Right.
And Biden and the Democrats, not just him, but the Democrats in general, really did not fight to extend these programs and make them permanent.
Right.
And what does that mean in politically, as we're facing once again the most important election of our lifetime, according to the Democrats? And what does that mean for the people who no longer have the benefit of these programs?
Yes, as usual, Sister Jacqueline, you asked very deep and complex questions. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with the political headline that this is the strongest safety net ever. One, the strongest safety net shouldn't collapse in a year. Right.
There's that.
But I mean, are we ignoring the New Deal programs? Are we ignoring Social Security? Are we ignoring Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson, Medicare, and so forth? We're ignoring those. Now, those programs are still with us, although there's continuing struggle here by Republicans ever since those programs have been put in place, right? To collapse those programs, to cancel those programs, but they have stood up against that pressure. Social Security is I think appropriately called the third rail in American politics. There's an understanding among those who are opposed to Social Security. Imagine that people are opposed to folks in their retirement period having something to retire on. But there are those who have been opposed to Social Security since its inception, and they have been unsuccessful at destroying those programs. These American Rescue Plan programs have collapsed under their own weight. There was no opposition necessary. They were scheduled to expire, and they have. And so, political typically and frequently is very hyperbolic in its praise for the Biden administration and for Democrats, and the headline makes no sense. Strongest is really way over the top. But That being the case, we have, for example, the expiration of the child tax credit. Now, that figure there about the halving, cutting in half the child poverty rate, came from the extension of the child tax credit, where parents received some extra money, $300 per month for children, I think under 16, and something like 250 per month extra for children over 16 every month until it expired in December of last year. That pool, that income, extra income, pulled half of the children who were in poverty out of poverty. Now, it may not have pulled them much out of poverty. You know, if you're a dollar out of poverty, you're out of poverty.
Right.
But it still did that. And the Democrats, who were still in charge of the federal government during the transition, if you will, from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. Even though it was a lame duck session, they could have come in and done what Republicans do in lame duck sessions. They actually passed legislation. They were in charge. They could have extended that. They could have made it permanent, but they did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And even though you could say Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, Schumer is head of the Senate, and so you might put the blame on them. Joe Biden, even though he wasn't president yet, Joe Biden was the head of the Democratic Party. And if he had said to them, we're going to extend this, we're going to make it permanent, they would have done so. And he did not do that. And so now those half of children who were in poverty, who came out of poverty, are now back in poverty. It's a disaster. It is tragic that the Democrats didn't fight for that. And one thing to be said, I mean, yes, poor people were helped tremendously by the American Rescue Plan, but I don't think it was done to help poor people. It
Mm.
was done to help corporations,
Oh.
because we're talking about an economy in which the unemployment rate had risen to almost 20%. People are out of work. Well, people who are out of work don't have money to spend. And if they don't have money to spend, then corporations can't make their profits. Then corporations. So it wasn't an American rescue plan. It was a rescue plan for corporate. It was a corporate rescue plan, and poor people just happened to be the middlemen in the transfer of wealth from government to corporations. That's the same thing that how I think about welfare programs in general.
Mm.
You mentioned the Reagan administration. Now, the Reagan administration, of course, was all against all kinds of AFDC programs and other kinds. You had the welfare queen narrative and so forth. But the fact is that when the poor get money from government, that money gets spent, and that money that gets spent ends up in the bank accounts of the wealthy. Understand, we're going to talk a little bit about modern monetary theory. And
Mm-hmm.
one insight from modern monetary theory is that government spending ends up somewhere. It doesn't just disappear when the government spends it. It doesn't disappear when those who receive government money spend it. It ends up somewhere. Dollars don't disappear. They stay around somewhere, and they end up in the bank accounts of the corporations and so forth as profit. And what the Reagan administration wanted to do was to eliminate the middleman. They wanted to take the government spending and go right to the corporations. They couldn't figure out a way to do that. What the American Rescue Plan did was transfer money from the government. Now, that money that goes into the government, in the case of ordinary thinking, comes out of tax dollars, right? But the nearly $2 trillion in the American Rescue Plan did not come out of tax dollars. It was government spending. It was money that was created. That newly created money helped people to pay their bills, to feed their children, to get to work if they still had jobs, or to start businesses. But that money eventually is spent, and it ends up in the pocket. It doesn't go back to government. It ends up in the pocket of the wealthy. And so that $2 trillion basically increased the wealth of the wealthy, and we saw that happening with the billionaires who increased their wealth by 70% during the pandemic. That's the $2 trillion, and its multiplier effects that came out of government spending. So that money wasn't done to help the poor. That money was spent to make sure that the wealthy could continue to stay in business.
That is,
The poor were just the middlemen
ugh.
in the transaction.
And we should not believe that the very smart people on Capitol Hill, and I'm really not giving these people more credit than they deserve. We should not believe that these people do not understand that.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Tauheed, because if you really want to help poor people, if that was really the reason that the American Rescue Plan included these policies, why have an expiration date for them?
Right.
Why sunset them only after a year? If
Hmm.
you, I mean, were these people not going to be poor after a year?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm so glad you explained that these
Mhm.
programs they were not put in this program, in this bill, to help the poor.
Mhm.
That I'm glad you made that point. And then Joshua Ingram makes another great point that I hope that you can explain. Let's not forget the context that the federal government's measure of poverty is questionable at best. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think I would say that what I think Joshua means, and I would agree, is that the poverty rate, the rate, the amount of money that's estimated for people to be able just to buy basic food, clothing, and shelter does not keep up in any sense with the real cost of food, clothing, and shelter. When we have, for example, tremendous increases in the cost of things during a pandemic, right? We have inflation. We have increasing inflation, certainly after the pandemic, because of supply chain problems. And so the price of gasoline, the price of food, the price of housing, we should talk about that, not just mortgages, but rental. When that goes up, the poverty rate should go up, because if you're not making enough, or if you're barely making enough to provide food, clothing, and shelter before, and you are in poverty, and the prices of those things go up, you are further down in poverty. And those who were not in poverty before will fall under the ability to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves. So the poverty rate should, in fact, go up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at the statistic is that half of the children who were in poverty came out of poverty for the child tax credit. What Joshua's point leads to an understanding is those families got a little more money to enable them to pay their rent, to enable them to not have foreclosure, to
Mm-hmm.
enable them to put food, which was more expensive. And so, yeah, it really is not the correct analysis to say that even 50% of children came out of poverty, because the poverty rate should have gone up, because it was more expensive for people to live. And so Joshua is right. And so we have to take any statistics, even hopeful statistics that half the children in poverty came out of poverty. We have to take that with an understanding that the poverty rate is, in some sense, an arbitrary measure. I mean, we look at, for example, real wages since 1970, and
Mm-hmm.
real wages actually have gone down. That is, the ability of people to buy things has gone down. Therefore, things are more expensive, and the poverty rate should go up just based on that, but it doesn't.
And it's amazing that everything we understand about this system even when corporate media reports on the failure of the Democrats to do anything for the poor, even if they really didn't intend to do anything for the poor in the first place.
Yeah.
It's based on so much foolishness
Mhm.
and obfuscation and just a complete mess. So the other thing that I did want to share before we move into the other part of this was, this is so fascinating to me, Dr. Tauheed, that it actually comes from JPMorgan Chase.
Mhm.
And I guess, they're making enough money. They don't have any reason to lie. What if, what? They're not going to lose anything by telling the truth. But even they point out in their own data, they have this report that they release called the Household Pulse. And their research shows, first of all, the Household Pulse um, is research that leverages de-identified administrative banking data to examine the path of household cash balances from January 2020 through March 2023 for roughly 9 million Chase customers. So these are their own customers,
Right.
the weekly balances of
Mhm.
their own customers. Um, they show the cash balance trends across the income distribution of their customers and the balances by race and ethnicity for the first
Mhm.
time in their series. So we scroll down, and these are their findings. First, across all income quartiles, households saw their combined real checking and savings balances decrease during the second half of 2022, rising slightly in this year, March 2023. Guess when? When people got their income taxes back.
Mhm.
At the end of March 2023, households in the highest income quartile had median balances of around $9,000,
Mhm.
while balances for the lowest income quartile were around $1,300.
Mhm.
This represents sizable decreases from peaks in the same time last year
Mhm.
after tax return distributions, when balances were around $10,700 and $1,400 respectively. So
Mhm.
this is the chart where they show this,
Mhm.
and let me reduce that a little bit so you can see the whole chart. And they show the timeline here, and you can see the trend line going down.
Right.
Even the so-called wealthier people, I
Mhm.
guess this is the middle class up here.
Well, this is the middle class here. This is not the very
Right.
wealthy. I mean, the very wealthy don't have $12,000 balances, right?
Exactly. And these are poor people
Yeah.
down here.
And the middle class are increasingly poor people, right?
Right. So the idea of a middle class, a comfortable middle class in this
Yeah.
country, it's not a thing. So that's the overall chart. So if you scroll down, and that's another one, but if you scroll down to the second finding, fascinating. Black and Hispanic households had consistently lower median cash balances than white and Asian households, and saw greater relative balance gains during the pandemic. Balance gains for all groups have since been depleting.
Hmm.
So they go down and they have this fantastic chart here where they show, well,
Right.
these just get bigger and bigger. Hold on, let me uh hopefully do that. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
So median weekly cash balances by race and
Hmm.
ethnicity. And you see here, Black and Hispanic still at the bottom
Hmm.
of the income distribution, but from January 2020 to January 2022, those balances increased. And there were
Hmm.
fluctuation, but they increased. But you see here, they're back down again,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That increase is the the American Rescue Plan additions to unemployment insurance and child tax credit and
Mm-hmm.
other kind of things. It looked pretty good, but it was only temporary. And
Right.
now we are down below what it was before any of this pandemic great recession started, right? Because
Exactly.
people are depleting. There's been stories recently, but they're not new stories, of the inability of the poor and now increasingly the middle class to come up with a $400 amount to handle emergency situations. So, in other
Mm.
words, it was roughly, if I remember the numbers correctly, about 50, about you know, see, 48 in 2020, about 48% of middle class and lower income workers said they could not come up with $400 if they had to find that in an emergency, right? Or excuse me, let me reverse this. It's only 48% who could find $400.
Right. Hmm.
That number has fallen now to 46% who could. It's
Wow.
increased by 2% during this period. Here we are in cash balances, right? Cash balances are going down, but then there are some persons, who don't have even $1,000 in their bank account, don't have
Hmm.
$400. They could not come up with a $400 payment. And that amount of not being able to come up with $400 is not only increasing among the poor, but also among the middle class.
Hmm. Hmm. And this last chart, I think, speaks to that. Black and Hispanic households, excuse me, saw greater percent change gains and balances than white and Asian households during periods of government intervention, though these gains have since converged. And if you look at this chart, so here is I guess, the percentage of percent change relative to 2019 in median real weekly cash balances by race and ethnicity.
Mhm.
In January 2020, everybody was around the same, in the same boat as far as the percentage of the change in their weekly cash balances.
Right.
You add the intervention of the government through the American Rescue Plan, and then you see that Black and Hispanic customers of JPMorgan Chase, now remember, this is just JPMorgan Chase customers,
Hmm.
they experienced the highest percentage change after government intervention in their weekly cash balances,
Hmm.
higher than Asian and white customers throughout the entire time until January 22, February 22, and here we are now after January 23. And guess where Black people are now? They're
Hmm.
back on the bottom. Black and Hispanic people, the blue and green lines, back on the bottom end of the negative weekly change in cash balances now that the government intervention is done. So this leads me to conclude, Dr. Tauheed, and I'm going to drop this lovely article in the chat for y'all so you can see these things yourself. This leads me to conclude, Dr. Tauheed, something that we talk about all the time, but I think this provides another piece of evidence for people who just really don't believe us when we say that every time the federal government in this country does something that benefits Black people, they can't, white people can't take that, and it must be stopped.
Well, I would make it more general.
Okay.
If we're in a situation where the government has done something for Black people, but for that have benefited Black people and have benefited us more. Now, look, a change in a cash balance of, let's say, 100% may mean that your balance went from $100 to $200.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no indication of how much you had in that bank account in that graph. It is an indication of how much it changed. So with Blacks having generally less money, getting another $300 a month in unemployment insurance enables you to increase your cash balances more by a percentage more than someone who had $1,000 in their
Mm-hmm.
bank account, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the change is going to be greater for those who are poor, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the amount that goes out is the same. And so African Americans, blacks were and Hispanics were helped the most by that process. But again, we weren't helped because people thought we needed help. It was JP Morgan Chase that needed help. And so the money flows out into our bank account at JP Morgan Chase, which gives them more to invest in things. And what capitalists understand, there's this dilemma that capitalists need to reduce their costs in order to increase their profitability. That generally falls on, if you can do it, in a decrease in wages, right? But that decrease in wages, if you just say, well, let's decrease wages to zero, well, then there's nobody to buy your product because nobody has any money. So capitalists are in this dilemma. They have to keep money flowing, but they also have to try to get as much of it as they can. That's a contradiction, right? That's the fundamental contradiction. And so, in this era in which government can pay because it's not coming out of corporate profits, didn't have an increase in their taxation. If corporations can convince government to create a new $2 trillion of money, they know that money is going to eventually flow to them. And if it flows through the poor or others, then that's how it flows to them. I mean, the government could have taken $2 trillion and given it to JP Morgan Chase, as an example, or their help. That would look a little shady. Now, that's not like they didn't do that after 2008. They did that after 2008, but that was the Fed that did that. So it's no people, it was kind of hidden. Here, the federal government is creating $2 trillion, and instead of sending it directly to Jeff Bezos, I'm going to skip around. They said, "Well, we'll give it to Linwood Tauheed, and he'll give it to Jeff Bezos." So it'll eventually get there. So understand the motivation is it wasn't to help the poor or the middle class, but it did have an effect on the poor and middle class to make their lives, well, I won't say better. It helped them preserve their lives. We're talking about a nearly 20% unemployment rate, which is almost as high an employment rate as during the Great Depression. The official unemployment rate during the Great Depression was 25%. So it got up there. And now during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt put in place a program called Social Security and other welfare programs that did not sunset. So it had a permanent increase in the well-being of the poor and middle class. It's not enough now. I mean, the minimum wage has come into effect as well. That minimum wage at that time, I think it was like 25 cents when it was put in place. But we're talking about wages in 1933. It's now $7.25 25 cent, and if it had kept up with inflation, it should be about $30.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's in place. It's helping people at least pay a few bills, but it's not enough because
Mm-hmm.
most of this money is flowing into corporate coffers.
Wow. Mm. So once again, poor people left stranded. Not as if they were, and this is the belief that any government assistance for poor people, black or white or other, is that people think of welfare queens. Oh my God, they're buying Cadillacs. People are literally buying food. People
Well,
people are like actually paying their rent on
mm,
time.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah,
So it's not that this isn't what was done by the Biden administration in the American Rescue Act was not some great windfall of largesse rather from the government. It was literally it was a temporary, it was a band-aid on a gunshot wound
right.
for the
And
poor.
of course, the American Rescue Plan is a bipartisan plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
We should always be suspicious when Republicans pretend to do things to benefit the poor. But the fact that Joe Biden did it and got them to do it is touted as Joe Biden's great ability to work across the aisle, bipartisanship, and so forth. But that plan, like I said, that not only had money that was going to go through the poor to the wealthy, it had lots of money that was going to go directly to the wealthy without going through the poor, and so that's still in place. The Trump tax cuts are still in place. The Bush tax
Mm-hmm,
cuts are still in place.
mm-hmm.
Although Joe Biden, campaigned on increasing the tax rate for those who are making over $400,000, that has not been done, and so it's not even been proposed again, except by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They proposed doing it, and but they proposed doing it in the context of Social Security. That is, taxing the Medicare part of the Social Security, which is capped for I think $162,000. They've said, look, we can deal with this so-called Social Security insolvency problem by having persons making over $400,000 still contribute into the Social Security Trust Fund. That'll make Social Security solvent for the next 75 years. This argument over Social Security will go away. That's coming from Bernie Sanders putting Joe Biden's words into a program to save Social Security. Joe Biden hasn't said, "Oh, I think that's a good idea."
Mm, mm-hmm. And speaking of Social Security, believe it or not, folks, once again, the GOP is trying to cut Social Security. And of course, Biden is using this as an opportunity to posture as the good guy who's trying to save Social Security. But come on now. Anyway, Biden blasts Republican plan to cut taxes on the wealthy, which Dr. Tauheed just said that Biden is not fitting to cut. He's not fitting to tax the wealthy about anything at all, and to cut social safety net programs. So this is reported by CNBC. Joe Biden, in a speech Thursday, contrasted his Bidenomics policies with with what the White House has dubbed MAGAnomics. I hate these terms so much. As the two parties continue to spar over the budget with a potential government shutdown on the horizon. I thought the last compromise throwing working class and poor folks under the bus to
Mm-hmm.
avoid a shutdown the last time, I
Mm-hmm.
thought, anyway,
No. Go and say it.
I do. So, no, let me get to the Social Security thing first because I don't want to, because I'm just, that's just so ridiculous. But the MAGAnomics vision outlined by Biden is based on the budget released in June by the Republican Study Committee. The core tenets of the Republican plan that the administration highlighted are cutting taxes for the wealthiest Americans. That's what Republicans just do. And corporations. That's just what Republicans do. And making cuts to social safety net programs, also just what Republicans do, such as Social Security and Medicare, and eliminating Medicare's ability to negotiate drug prices and the cap on insulin.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of things other than the last budget showdown foolishness that was supposed to be the last budget showdown foolishness. The fact that this study was released in June by the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And when was this? The Biden administration has not said anything about it until this week.
Campaign time.
See, there's that.
Yeah.
There's that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then and then of course there is the fact that Biden is acting as if cutting Social Security and Medicare, but specifically Social Security, is a uniquely GOP thing. Democrats, including Biden, Obama, and Biden,
Right.
have put forth plans to tinker with Social Security. Stop me, Dr. Tauheed. What the
No,
hell?
no, no. I can't stop you. You're on a roll. Biden, as a senator for 40 years, was continuously working with Republicans to cut Social Security benefits. Okay, so this is when Obama was a wee little boy. So Obama gets in office and tries to cut what became known as the grand bargain with Republicans to cut Social Security. It didn't work. George Bush II tried to do that before him. He said he had political capital that he had gained from 9/11, and he started going around the country trying to get privatization of Social Security sold. It didn't work. It is that third rail, at least so far now. Sometimes third rails become decrepit and fall over. Hopefully that won't happen this time. But the idea that Biden is now opposed to Social Security cuts when for 40 years he was with the Republicans on that is ridiculous. But here's another thing that caught my eye there. This first time I've seen this term Maganomics.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember the graph you just showed of balances,
Mm-hmm.
increasing balances, that was June of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump, the MAGA man, was
Right.
president in June of 2020.
Right.
So if that's Maganomics, maybe we need to bring back Maganomics, instead of Bidenomics, because as Biden being president, those balances have declined.
I mean, and what do you how do you politically parse that? The fact that under Trump, there, and oh, I almost hate to say it, but I mean, and I know that JPMorgan Chase is just one bank, but I if they're just one bank and they're that transparent
Yeah.
with the material realities of the cash balances of their 9 million customers, the
Mhm.
same has to be true for every other bank
Yes.
in this country with their customers, and it's got to be true for the unbanked as well. For as little money as they have, they're not able to have enough money to have a bank account, but maybe they were able to have a little bit more money than they had before. And how do we politically deal with the fact that some of Donald Trump's policies actually did put more money in the pockets of poor people? Oh, I feel so terrible saying that.
But understand, it put more money in the pockets of poor people so they could spend it, right?
So it's the same thing.
So
It's the same thing that Biden did.
it's the same thing, but at least Trump is not stingy about that process, right? What he realizes is this: if I can get the government to spend more money with the poor, that's more money in his bank account. So let's just get let's have the government put a $10 trillion program. It'll all end up in my bank account anyway. So I
Right.
don't so if it's a big program, then I'm better off. The Democrats are not only are not only tricky, but they're stingy. I would rather the Democrats come out and say this money is for eventually for J.P. Morgan, for Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan, but in the meantime you can have a good life, and let's just open up the floodgates and have you have a good life, even if it's only for a couple of years.
Mm, wow. And
I,
and
I,
I mean,
this is laughable, but it really isn't. It really isn't.
and that's the thing, because when you look at the totality of Trump's presidency, the totality of his policies as a commie, as a whole communist sitting over here, I'm just like, no, we don't want any more of that. Economically, as an economist, it is difficult. You can't ideologically and from a principled standpoint ignore the differences in the way these two political parties, or at least these two presidents,
Mhm.
handled, at least economically, because both administrations handled the overall COVID pandemic basically by sacrificing a whole bunch of people to capitalism
Mhm.
and not doing anything to protect people and really not giving a damn that over 1 million people died from this pandemic.
Yeah.
But it's hard to look at numbers in that chart from JP Morgan and understand who was president when and not say, "Oh crap. Uh the Democrats undid what what they did, but they even undid what Donald Trump started." And it's really bad for the Democrats that
Yeah.
that is the reality. That at least on this one thing of all the things Joe
Mhm.
Biden has campaigned on that he promised that he hasn't done, he couldn't even, he refused to do better than Donald Trump in at least lying to people and saying, hey, I'm throwing you these crumbs because I want to help the poor, or at least extending these programs for another year, at least.
Well, Jamie Dimon as CEO of JP Morgan, we should have no illusions about this. If this is coming from JP Morgan, this report, it's because he's authorized its publication.
Mm,
And he's authorizing its publication because he is wanting to make sure that JP Morgan stays financially solvent, right? And so he's alerting us to the problem that people have less money, which means they have less money to put in my bank. Now
right.
the wealthy don't have their money in JP Morgan, not the public bank.
Right.
They have their money in private banks.
Mm-hmm.
So their balances have gone up. Let's show the balances of the Bezos and the Musk. Their balances have gone up. But the regular banking, J.P. Morgan, the regular banking, commercial banking, is fluctuating, and the balances are going down. And if those balances get too low, then J.P. Morgan gets into trouble as a bank because it can't increase it can't pay its dividends. Its stockholders will be upset. J.P. Morgan will be he'll be out of the job,
Mm-hmm.
and his only fault will be he didn't lobby the government hard enough to get them to make another American Rescue Plan so that balances can go up again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this comment from Nawadi says, so this allows JP Morgan to decrease their profit outlooks
Yeah,
for their shareholders.
exactly, and it allows
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Dimon to say it's not my fault.
Right, right.
Blame it on Biden. We want Trump back as president because that'll be his next move.
Oh my God. A
I,
what a predictable situation we are in this country.
well, I guess I became an economist because I believe that money is important. So let's just follow the money. It all goes out in profit. And so when the powerful speak about things that are bothering them, it's all about them not making enough profit. That's all it's
Mm-hmm.
about.
Ooh,
and
this is
and, and and if we get help in the meantime, because look, during the pandemic there were a group of workers who were identified as essential workers.
oh, don't get me started.
Those persons who had to go out and engage in personal services. They couldn't work from home. They
Mm-hmm.
had to be out in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
They were never essential before, and they
Right.
haven't been essential since.
Exactly.
But during the pandemic, they were essential because they were service workers, and people had to, if you're living at home, if you're at home and you're working, you're able to do that from home. You need somebody to deliver your meals to you. Though that's an essential worker. So let's make sure that they stay in business, that they stay with jobs and so forth. Even though the jobs are gig jobs, they're part-time jobs, they're not enough money. We at least need to let them know they are essential to feeding me every day. So I need them to continue to work. So
Mm-hmm.
there's this opportunism that happens. They were essential workers when it was important to the wealthy, but they're not important to the wealthy. They can be replaced now with robots and AI systems and so forth. So they're not as essential as they used to be.
Right. Excuse me. Sith Lord Prince asked this great question: what's the role of shareholders in corporations, and what does that mean for workers?
Well, yeah, it's very very good question. To the extent that workers themselves are directly or indirectly investors in corporations. I mean, if you're a worker and you have a pension plan, that money is invested in some corporation, right? And even if you're retired, your retirement money is invested in some corporation. There are a lot of persons who are workers who are shareholders in corporations. Now, the fact is, they're not major shareholders.
Right.
And if you have a pension fund and it's invested in a corporation, the managers of that pension fund are getting a lot more out of that pension fund in terms of fees and management than you are, which is the reason, for example, for wanting to privatize Social Security, right?
Ah.
You
Hmm.
throw Social Security into that process, that creates a new profit center for the investors, investment companies. So workers, we've got this again, another contradiction in this capitalist system is that workers are both beneficiaries and victims of corporate shareholder process. Of course, those who escape all of this are the very wealthy, who have control of these corporations. You know, you don't have to have 50% of the voting shares of a corporation to be in control. In fact, the estimate from economists who work on this, the mainstream economists wanted this kept secret. But if you have 5% ownership of a corporation, of corporate shares, you are required to report that to the SEC. Now, that's not a new requirement. That's an older requirement back to a time in U.S. history when, the New Deal and those times, where when government was was organized to actually help workers increase. You know, we have an increase in unionism and so forth up until about 1950. So that rule of 5% ownership is important because if you have 5% ownership of a corporation, you have enough significant power to influence other 5% holders of corporations to give you 55%. So now you have effective control. If Dr. Tauheed, who has 1 millionth of 1% of a corporation, I can't create a conglomeration of 1 million people to get a 1% share. So I'm not important. So that 5% control is significant because it puts you in a category with other people who might want to control what's going on in the corporation. And
Mm.
so that money from your pension fund is helping these corporations to make their money, and the most of that goes to the wealthy.
Hmm. Wow. And okay, one more question before we get to the issue of the show, the shutdown. So Easy D asked you, he's shaking his head. This is gonna be good. Easy D asked, what about the idea of a black bank? I think we talked about this before, but I think it's worth revisiting
Yeah.
since, the American Rescue Plan was they just used us as middlemen to shovel more money to corporations,
Yeah.
including
Yeah.
banks.
Yeah, I think banks are part of the current financial system, and black control of a bank is a good thing as long as that black control of the bank is going to help regular black folks and not simply the officers of that corporation, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like banking in general, except if when you put your money in a white bank, shareholders are mostly white, then that money is economic development for them, right? For that community. If you have a black bank, but the money in that black bank is invested outside of the black community, that's economic development. That's a flow of money out of the community outside. So black banks, if they are black banks, not only mostly owned by black folks as corporations, but also investing in black communities is a good thing. It's a place to consolidate our money and our development power. I'm more in favor of credit unions because credit unions are owned by their members,
Right.
whereas banks are owned by their stockholders. So when you say a black bank, assume you mean a bank in which most of the stockholders are in the black community, not just a bank that's in the black community. It's ownership matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so black banks are if we're talking about ownership matters, but it's an ownership. It's not just a matter of ownership. It's a matter of what the money in that bank is doing for the black community. And if black banks are run like white banks, then they're charging exorbitant fees. You have a check that bounces. You get $25. Now, the only people who bounce checks are people who don't have the money to actually write checks. If you have to write a check, but you don't really have the money, so you're writing a check, it bounces. A $25 fee actually just puts you more in the hole.
Right.
So can black banks not charge $25? In fact, can we maybe help those who have checks that are bouncing to not bounce checks in the future, because we can help them to learn how to budget better. Now, I say that understanding that if you don't have any money, you can't budget any better
Right.
So you have to have. So this is talking to parts of the black community that actually maybe have some more than that $400 emergency money that they
Right.
need. But if you have the income and you're doing things like buying, I don't know what Nikes cost anymore, but if you're buying five
Oh,
hundred
let me.
dollar if you're buying $500 tennis shoes, you probably need some help in keeping that $500 in doing something better with it. So black banks should be involved in financial literacy, which will help those who have the discretionary income to benefit from it.
Right.
But
Who
but
have
black
the
banks,
finances?
right. But black banks should also be involved in investing in work and business in the community, so that we can decrease the unemployment rate in the community, and people will have more money in the bank. That helps the bank, right? To
Mm-hmm.
have bank balances that are going to go up. And so black banks are, if they're truly black banks in the way that we would think of black banks, are a good thing.
And there aren't many of them in this country. Are there? I can think of one in Washington, D.C., and that's Industrial Bank,
Hmm.
I think.
There's
Yeah,
I'm
that's
trying to think of the here in Kansas City. There's Liberty Bank. There is a bank that's prominent bank, black bank. When I say prominent, it advertises a lot. I forget the name of it. But with the two that you and I have mentioned in that one bank, I'm trying to think of the name. There's a handful of black
mm-hmm.
banks in the
Yeah.
country, and there used to be hundreds of them, right? But that was when we had to bank in black banks, because we couldn't get accounts in white banks.
Mm-hmm.
And through integration, we've taken our money out of the black banks and put them in white banks, and those banks have disappeared.
Yeah.
That's one part. There's also the discriminatory process of that denies bank charters, or regulates them more
Right.
fiercely, so that they have to go out of business. Black banks have been driven out of business by government action too.
And that's the politics of it. That's the straight, raw politics of why black banks with black shareholders with investing in black communities don't exist, because politically they've been driven out of business. So, okay, Dr. Tauheed, I thought the last bipartisan compromise that Joe Biden entered into with these GOP
Yeah.
people was the last one to avoid a government
Hmm.
shutdown. And here they are talking about The GOP is planning on their budget plan includes cutting Social Security, Medicare, and the ability to negotiate prescription drugs in this new budget plan to avoid another shutdown. What the heck?
Yeah, I was surprised to see that myself because as like you, I thought the deal had been struck that this is out of range for the next 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
That's what
what
they said.
yeah, well, no, now there won't be any debt ceiling struggle for the next 2 years, but apparently you can shut the government down even if you know you have enough money to spend. So yeah, it is very political in this sense, but is it unexpected? It can't be unexpected from the
Mm-hmm.
Democrats to believe that the Republicans are one going to shut down the government to make a point, particularly during a campaign season,
Mm-hmm.
right? That they're going to try to go after Social Security. They've been doing that since 1933. That they're going to they're going to try to eliminate the the ability of Medicare to negotiate on even the few medications that supposedly the Biden administration is trying to get negotiations on, including important ones like insulin.
Mm-hmm.
But that it can't be this can't that can't be unexpected. Now, the fact that the Republicans are doing it is unexpected. The idea that the Democrats don't have a plan, have not responded to this, is well, that should be they should have had a plan. They should have responded to this, but they're not. There's no strong response to this. It's as if it's surprising to the Democrats that the Republicans would try to pull another rabbit out of the hat.
Mm-hmm.
You campaign on everything is okay for the next 2 years. So vote for Joe Biden again. We'll work on this, and then this comes up again. It can't be a surprise.
I mean, it's somebody put in the chat that Nawadi said the Dems are Charlie Brown and the Republicans are Lucy, and they keep telling the Democrats, okay, this is fine. I'm going to hold the ball. You can kick it now. And every time they yank that ball away, and the Democrats are always surprised. And
Yep.
but
But
this
but
is
but
the problem with bipartisanship, though.
mm,
You notice, Dr. Tauheed, that Republicans almost never talk about bipartisanship.
mm,
They almost never talk about working with the Democrats to get there. When Republicans are in power, when there's a Republican in the White House,
mhm,
they never talk about working across the aisle to get any of their agenda passed because
right,
they don't care. They and their caucus, it doesn't matter how many different caucuses are in the Republican Party, whoever the Republican president is, he whips those people into shape and he tells
mhm,
them this is what we're going to do. And that's all there is to it. You're going to
right,
fall in line and that's it.
yep. Yeah, Republican presidents don't let Joe Manchin figures, run the party. The Republican president is the one who is in charge, and it's his way or the highway. But understand, the larger context for this is that both Republicans and Democrats have the same donors. So
Mm-hmm.
the agenda is always what the donors want. The Republicans are just more honest about it. They work for big business, and whatever big business wants. And in fact, their mantra is always, we're going to decrease the taxes on the wealthy because they're going to use that money to employ the poor. They never do it,
They never do.
but they're not expected to do it. But the Democrats are always, we're going to increase the taxation on the wealthy. They never do it because the wealthy are their donors.
Mm-hmm. And
And when the wealthy give $1 million into a campaign fund, they get $1 billion back in return. That's
oh
their
wow.
investment.
That's an amazing return on an investment. That
Absolutely.
for the wealthy, $1 million, nothing. That
Right.
is literally sofa lint
Yeah.
to the wealthy in this country.
Right.
So what does this mean for what do we need to understand about the solvency of Social Security with these new threats?
Okay.
Uh,
There are a couple of things. One, I mentioned that Bernie Sanders has proposed increasing raising the cap on Medicare contributions into Social Security, which are capped right now at 162,000, I think, in that range. I think it was 145, then it's been raised to 162. So if you make $162,000 in wages, you're not capped on the Medicare portion of Social Security, right? But anything below that, you're capped at the what's the 1.5%. And it's 6.2% for Medicare for Social Security, and then Medicare is the other 1.2%. But as Bernie Sanders has said, and as the calculations are easy, they're not difficult. If you increase the taxes so that everyone over $400,000 has in that continue to pay into Medicare, then the Medicare system is solvent for 75 years. That's one issue, but that's not. I mean, the issue from a point of view of what's called modern monetary theory is none of that is actually necessary, right? Because the government can continue to fund Social Security and Medicare even without any taxation for that. You could lower the tax rate for Social Security and Medicare, and the government could continue to fund that because the government can create money. You know, in times past, the idea that the government could create so much money to fund Social Security was kind of saying, oh, that's a lot of money. But we've gone through a period of time when the government has spent $2 trillion to keep the economy afloat.
mhm.
That is, if that $2 trillion was not spent, we would be in depression. And of course, then corporations would be in bad shape. They wouldn't be able to make their profit. And so the government has created another $2 trillion in debt, more than that, but just $2 trillion just with the American Rescue Plan. And the economy has been able to chug along instead of falling into depression. Now that money has been spent, so now we're falling into recession uh, because the money has been spent, but also because interest rates have been going up, have been raised by the Fed, and there's a slowdown, and that's the intention of the Fed to slow things down, and you end up in a recession.
Mhm.
But the idea from modern monetary theory that the government doesn't need to tax in order to spend, I try to think of ways of kind of explaining this without being too technical
Mhm.
and with metaphors and ideas that everyday people, I'll use that term, who are not economists might understand. But a lot of economists don't understand this either, so it's not a big deal. Think about it this way. The Social Security system is supposed to become insolvent, I think, 2035, right? Insolvent means there won't be enough tax money coming in to pay the Social Security benefits going out. Not that there's no money, but there's more money going out than coming in. Okay. And let's say 2035, okay, that's the date. Let's say January 1st. Um, well, let me just back up. Let's say December 31st, 2035. We look in the Social Security fund and we say we've got zero money there. We can't pay out anything. It's all gone.
Mhm.
What happens to the economy on January 1st, 2036 if Social Security checks don't go out? The economy collapses, right? We go into depression because elders, persons on Social Security, can't go buy food, they can't buy clothing, they can't pay for shelter or taxes or any real estate tax. They can't pay any of that. That money doesn't show up.
Mhm.
So it is ridiculous to think that a government that can create money is going to let that happen. But let's say the government is not convinced. that they should spend money. They don't understand modern monetary theory, but I do. And let's say I have high level computer skills. Now, anybody listening understand that I don't know how to do this and wouldn't think of doing it. But let's say I hack into the Social Security system the last day of 2035, and I just put enough money. I just changed the ones and zeros in that system to so that when on January 1st, 2036, somebody looks in and says, "I thought we were out of money, but we got enough money here to make our payments."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's send out the checks. What happens to the economy? Nothing.
Yeah.
It continues on.
Right.
If I can get away with that every month, it's like Social Security never ran out of money. So we don't. So the Social Security Trust Fund being there is not important. What's important is, can the government send out checks? Now that's what the Federal Reserve does every day when they create new money.
Mm.
But the difference is this: somebody over in the U.S. Treasury creates a bond. A bond is basically, I take a piece of paper. I've got a piece of paper here. Okay. I take a piece of paper. I write the Secretary of the Treasury's name on it.
Mm-hmm.
I send that over to the Federal Reserve and says, "This is worth $1 billion." The Federal Reserve says, "Okay, it's worth $1 billion." They put $1 billion in the Treasury's fund.
That's
Now
it.
that's what they do every day. There's no difference, except I'm not authorized to do it because I'm a hacker. But get the Secretary of the Treasury to hack into the fund and put
Mm-hmm.
the money in, and everything is okay. If you don't do that, if you think that you really don't have any money, the economy collapses. If by creating new money, you continue the amount of spending that was done before, the economy goes on and nobody knows, nobody sees anything different. Okay? Because governments create money and governments are not limited in the amount of money they create. The only thing that is important for the amount of money that governments create is whether that money can be spent to buy resources out in the economy. If you have more money but no resources, no things to buy, you get inflation.
Mm-hmm.
But on the last day of 2035, the economy was producing enough for everyone. On the first day of 2036, it can still produce enough for everyone. So you create enough money to buy that stuff and nothing happens. No inflation, no fall in GDP, everybody's fine. So from a modern monetary point of view, there is no need. Yes, yes. Greenspan let the cat out of the bag. The Feds can fund any economic demand. But the only thing is you have to worry about inflation. Greenspan understood that. He said that when he testified to Congress, because Greenspan understands how money works. And most Congress people, if they understand, they pretend they don't.
Wow.
But the general public understand, and they know that money works that way because they know that the money they create ends up in the bank accounts of the rich. They don't want you to catch on to that. Well, you put it in the bank accounts of the rich, then just put it in the bank accounts of the poor. Every day, every month, put money into the bank accounts of Social Security recipients. It doesn't matter whether you have the tax dollars or not to do that. As long as they have something to spend that money on, it's like nothing happened.
Wow. So all of this foolishness about
It
Social Security going insolvent and they're running out of money and it's garbage.
it's
It's just a lie.
it's continuously to make Americans afraid, so that we might say, well, my Social Security account is going to go bankrupt. But if I put my money in Goldman Sachs,
Mm.
they'll manage it and it'll be okay. Well, okay, well, stocks go up and down, and your money is not
Mhm.
going to be okay there because they're going to take out fees, and you'll be worse off than you were if you had just hacked into the Social Security system and sent out the checks.
And another transfer of the people's money right into the hands of the banking
Ab-
wealthy.
Absolutely. See, the Federal Reserve System was set up. what an impetus for the Federal Reserve System was in 1906. There was a run on the banks in this country. Coming into a recession, people had their money in the banks, so they began to go to the banks to take their money out.
Mm-hmm.
And the federal government intervened in that, right? And the way you intervene in a bank run is when people go to the bank and they say, I want my money because they think it's not going to be there tomorrow. And the bank says, oh, your money is right here. You want it? Then people say, oh, I thought it was gone. I thought I might be the last person in line. You mean you got it? Don't worry about it. Keep it there. And the way that the federal government intervened in the bank run of 1906 was they went to JPMorgan and borrowed money from him.
Wow.
JP Morgan had more money than the US
The
Treasury.
federal government.
And so they borrowed money from him and put that in, deposited that in around banks. You know, we're talking about real money, real greenbacks. And when people showed up, they said, oh, my money's here. Okay, don't worry about it. So the bank run was stopped. By After seeing that happen, some people decided that it might not be a good idea for us to have to depend on JP Morgan to bail out the government. So they put in the Federal Reserve.
Mm.
The Federal Reserve, in its ability to create money, can stop bank runs. They don't have to borrow from anyone. They can simply create money and put it in the bank to stop bank runs. All they need is authorization from the Treasury to do that. That's that piece of paper with the Secretary of the Treasury's name on it, which is itself not worth anything, except it is the authorization of the Treasury for the Federal Reserve to create money.
Wow.
It,
That
it's essentially, if the Federal Reserve was part of the U.S. Treasury, then the U.S. Treasury could create money to put into the U.S. Treasury's account. Just take money out of one pocket and put it in another pocket. They made it a bank because you know how much we venerate banks. We think banks actually create money. It's not the government creating money when the Federal Reserve creates money. It's a bank creating money. No, the Federal Reserve can't create money without authorization from the Treasury. But the Treasury authorization is this.
Whew, boy. This is
It's smoke and mirrors. It really is.
And Jemimon says, now the only thing they're running is our pockets. And
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
the truth.
Yes.
I wanted to end on this last story, Dr. Tauheed, because last Friday I was in Ocean City, Maryland, and I had said that I'm going to have to take myself to the beach at least every 3 or 4 months just for my own sanity because there's so much going on and the beach is my happy sane place. And I tried to do my show from Ocean City, but I'm cheap, right? So I'm not going to spend the money for a really really nice hotel. I'm only going to get a nice enough hotel,
Yeah.
and you get the Wi-Fi that you pay for in a nice enough hotel. So I couldn't finish the show,
Mm,
but I really wanted to share this story because this story speaks to something. It's an ongoing argument, and it's an argument that I've decided to opt out of because my health and my sanity is just way too precious to me, and I'm not going to fight with people over this anymore.
hmm
People are still, a lot of white online commentators are still, these people are not organizing anything. They're not organizing cats. They are not organizing shit. They're not. But they have ever so much to say about identity politics and
Yeah.
how we cannot focus on racial issues and gender issues and stop talking about trans people and that type of thing. And, because that's a distraction from class issues. If we
Mm,
just talk about class issues, we're going to solve all these problems.
yes. Yes.
So this story emerges that flies absolutely in the face of that. And this is not like this is the
Mm,
first time this kind of thing has come out
hmm
about the way corporate America operates. Now
Right.
we're not talking about low wage workers here. We're not
hmm
talking about fast food workers. We're not talking about hotel service workers, the housekeeping staff and restaurant workers. We're talking about employees at Google.
Right.
engineers, programmers, people who were paid probably six figures.
Mm-hmm.
And Google still pays its Black employees $20,000 less than white colleagues. Now, this information was released from a leaked Google spreadsheet. I love whistleblowers; they're
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. They provide an immense service to the rest of us who venerate these corporations and don't know what's really going on
Mm-hmm.
inside them. And then someone comes along and says, first of all, workers started talking about their salaries to each other,
Mm-hmm.
which is something in corporate America that is frowned upon.
Yes. Yes.
People are almost punished
Mm-hmm.
for disclosing your salary to other workers, which
Mm-hmm.
is why it's something you should do all the time.
Right.
Go to lunch, tell your coworkers what you make, compare notes.
Right.
Compare notes and take notes. So this insider obtained this internal Google spreadsheet with over 12,000 US staff
Wow.
reporting their annual salaries just last year, 2022. The data covers software engineers, business analysts, salespeople, and legal counsel roles. These are not the
Right.
receptionists.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the janitorial staff. They're not the
Mm-hmm.
administrative staff. These are the highly paid people. The data sheet found that Black staff at Google tend to make $20,000 less than their white coworkers, with $147,000 going to Black workers and $170,000 going to white workers.
Mm-hmm.
White staff also got $40,000 more in equity than the
Mm-hmm.
Black team, with white workers getting $92,000 and Black workers getting $50,500.
Mm-hmm.
Bonuses also differ, with white workers getting $31,140 and Black workers earning $25,000. Indigenous and Hispanic staff also make less than their white and Asian co-workers. It also found disparities between women's and men's salaries, with men making more in every sector except the direct sales role, where women made a significant amount more. Employees who had been at the company longer and worked at a higher level tended to have higher salaries in cities such as New York and had higher wages than Colorado and Georgia. Google spokesperson Tamani Jayasingh said, "We compensate Googlers based on what they do, not who they are." Obviously, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at this data, and I'm going to drop this in the chat for y'all so you can look at it yourself. When we look at this data, um, Dr. Tauheed, even if we take their excuse that employees who have been at Google longer make more money,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't that still present a race and gender disparity? Because even if that's true, I'm asking the question, what took y'all so long to
Right.
recruit Black employees and women?
Exactly. Exactly. Google's motto is "Don't be evil." That's their motto. And even if you accept even if it turns out that white workers were hired first and they got more experience, and when Black workers were hired in, they're hired in at entry level. Therefore, there's going to be the disparity. You raise the exact question: what took you? Why were you evil for so long that you discriminated against Black workers and didn't hire them right away? And the question needs to be answered. What does Google need to do to pay for, to do reparatory justice, to pay for the evil that they did in their founding? Okay. And so the city of Kansas City has a reparations commission. It's just a new one. There are about 30 cities in the states, including states around the country, that have reparations commissions in various stages. We've just started. I'm a member of that commission. And the issue of reparatory justice is something that is very much on my mind. I've written on and will continue to be. Google as a private corporation is not a governmental entity, but if you have a motto that says "Don't do evil" or "Don't be evil," and you've been evil, you need to do something to repair that. And so, reparatory justice would be to take those that you hired late and give them compensation so that you pay them for what they do, not for when they joined your company.
Oh,
And if you do that, then those disparities disappear. But in addition, your community may know that there was a high level artificial intelligence researcher named Timnit Gebru, Ethiopian sister, American Ethiopian sister, because she may not have ever been to Ethiopia, but her background. She was part of the Google ethics group.
that's right.
And her research on artificial intelligence disclosed and found that artificial intelligence components like facial recognition were biased against Black folks. And she did a report. They tried to make her keep it secret, but she disclosed the report and they fired her.
That's right.
Right? And there are a number of Black high level computer science folks around the country who are raising their voices that artificial intelligence is a problem for the Black community. Now you have this meeting in Washington, D.C. of high level software and artificial intelligence people, the CEOs, who are now saying artificial intelligence might be a problem. Well, you're saying that now, but you fired someone 2 years ago who raised an issue to the public. Where's your reparatory justice in that process?
Yeah, I remember that case, and it's funny how the very same people I'm talking about absolutely silent on what was done to that sister. But anyway, enough of me ranting about my little personal beefs that I have with people online, because that's what that was. Right. But anyway, thank you so much, as usual, Dr. Tauheed, for breaking down these economic issues and these political issues for us in ways that we can not only understand that these people are lying through their teeth to us,
but they know it,
and making it clear that they know it, but also giving us the ammunition for how to fight against them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I missed last month. I let your community know that I had COVID. I went to a workshop in Washington, D.C. I've never had COVID before. I went to go to a workshop in Washington, D.C. It was an economics workshop with a group of institutional economists, and I was one of the presenters. And one of my colleagues was sick on a Wednesday. It was a Monday through Friday. She was sick on a Wednesday. I started getting sick on a Thursday. And fortunately, my COVID was mild, and I took some Paxlovid, and that got rid of even the mild symptoms. So I think I'm okay. I did have the pleasure of meeting Sister Jacqueline in DC in person. And then once I found out I had COVID, I had to email her and say, "You need to get tested, sister." And she did, and everything's fine. So, but I missed last month. But here we are. I've immensely enjoyed today. As usual.
So have I, and it was a treat to meet you. And thanks to that doggone vaccine. I don't care what anybody says. Thanks to that vaccine,
right?
None of us had COVID, and thanks to the vaccine, the one time I did contract COVID after I came back from Cuba, probably caught it at the airport in where did I can't remember where I flew into, but back in the U.S. when nobody had a mask on.
Yeah.
Thanks to that doggone vaccine, the COVID I caught was it did not put me in the hospital.
Yeah. By the way, I wanted to say this. I'm from Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
So I'm familiar with Ocean City. Been there. Uh,
Oh, goody.
Atlantic City and Wildwood and Ocean City. Our family used to go out to those places. So it's been a while, but I know how you mean what you mean by getting away to the beach.
Yeah, and Ocean City isn't even my favorite beach.
Yeah,
It's just 3 hours away from. It's just fast for me to get to when I need to get away. But one of these days I'm going to retire from this capitalist system and move to another country near a permanent beach
yeah, yeah.
for as long as climate change holds out, at least.
Yeah,
You know.
unfortunately.
Anyway, thank you all so
Yeah.
much for joining us tonight. It's been a fantastic show. We'll see you next week for, I don't know, who knows what. Thank you so much, Dr. Tauheed. And thank
Thank you.
you, everyone. Have a great evening. As always, luta continua. The struggle continues. But I promise you, if you keep fighting, if you keep struggling, Victoria acerta, victory is certain. Peace.